Mr. Commissioner, in the time that remains, Ms. Fong will begin, then Ms. Shabas, and then Mr. Timberg re-examining. That will complete Mr. Grout's evidence.
Mr. Commissioner, Lisa Fong for Heiltsuk Tribal Council, and with me is Christian Mori, articled student. Mr. Lund, thank you for pulling up that document. If you could please proceed to Appendix 4. It's Exhibit 445 and the first page of Exhibit 4. Or Appendix 4. Yes, that's it right there, the bullets. Thank you. Mr. Grout, this morning we had evidence from commercial fishermen that there's the ability to transfer uncaught allocation in season, and specifically they spoke about the 2010 fishing season and the transfer of allocation at that time. And I'm just looking at the IFMP from the south, which is what's on the screen, Appendix 4. And the bullets, I understand, are operational guidelines, and it's that last bullet I'm interested in. Thank you. And it reads, if after spawning escapement objectives are met and despite best efforts, it becomes apparent that an area license group is unable to achieve its target allocation, subject to conservation requirements, uncaught balances will be given first to the same gear type in a different license area, and second to different gear types in a manner that reflects their relative target allocations. Now, given what's been told to us about these transfer allocations, are you able to tell me this operational guideline, is that what allows for these transfer of uncaught allocations in season?
This is referred to in the allocation policy as well. So if one of our 8 commercial area gear fleets can't access its share, for example, the Area D gillnet, then that harvest, if possible, would be transferred to Area E, which is also a gillnet fleet, using the Fraser Sockeye example. If it turned out that it couldn't be transferred to Area E for perhaps a conservation reason, then it could go to the Area B seine fleet or the Area H troll fleet, to use an example. Right,
and that description that you've given of, I think it was D to E to B, is what happened this summer.
That's correct.
Thank you. So my other questions for you is understanding how this operational guideline works. So as a matter of process, is it typically something that's raised by the area group, or is it something that DFO raises? Like who raises this?
In terms of that 2010 example?
If, for example, like when there's a transfer allocation that's appropriate, who raises it?
In the case of the Fraser River Sockeye, this would be discussed with the Canadian caucus members of the Fraser River panel, and then the Fraser River Integrated Management Team. So it's an in-season decision that's made by that group.
And is it the group that advises you that there's a need, or is it something that DFO monitors and becomes aware of?
It's a two-way street there. The group would be aware of those potential issues, and the department would discuss it with them. It's ultimately the department that's going to make a decision, though.
Okay, and when you say it's a department that ultimately makes a decision, do you also incorporate into that decision-making information or input from the particular area groups that are affected?
In terms of the in-season example here for Fraser Sockeye, it's all done within the Fraser River panel process. The Canadian part of the Fraser River panel, including the DFO chair and co-chair and the Canadian caucus members, and then the Fraser River Integrated Management Team, which includes a number of our area management staff, would be involved.
Okay, and my memory, if you and if I'm wrong, you can correct me, is that process, this in-season process, happens quite quickly. So if there's a transfer that is identified as being appropriate, when you're in season, there are regular, I believe almost daily meetings, so decisions can be made quite quickly so that there's an efficiency and a meaningfulness to any sort of result to, for example, the Area B seiners, that yes, you can go and increase your allocation now.
Well, they typically don't meet every day there, but the Fraser River panel in season can make decisions quickly. At least the Canadian caucus piece and the Fraser River Integrated Management Team I was referring to. And once they make a decision, they'd put together fishing plans that would then be reviewed at the Fraser panel with the U.S. and the Canadian, the Pacific Salmon Commission.
So are you able to say to me, just sort of generally, from beginning to end, like from becoming aware that the issue's arisen, that a transfer might be appropriate of allocation, to the actual announcement to the area group that you're going to get this transfer? Are we talking days, weeks, hours?
I'm not, haven't been directly involved in the Fraser River panel process for a number of years, but it can be done very quickly. I would think once a decision is made to do it, it can be done very quickly. I'm not sure, but I suspect the Fraser panel had been talking about it for a period of time, but I couldn't give you the exact number of days.
Thank you. And just so I understand, this morning I also heard that there was, if I understood it properly, there's no compensation scheme when there's an area, or so when there's a transfer of uncaught allocation, such that the group that's giving away their uncaught allocation is not being compensated for it.
No, as I stated before, we try and make the transfer to the same gear group if we can to respect the coast-wide allocation framework, but if that's not possible, it goes to any other gear that could harvest the fish. There's not a catch-up, make-up provisions as part of the allocation framework.
Okay, but is there a position that DFO takes that there can't be a catch-up or make-up agreement between the areas, the area groups? Well, I guess it wouldn't be catch-up or make-up, but some kind of compensatory arrangement between them?
We have not made those, or there have not been those arrangements.
Okay. And are you aware as the DFO would prohibit that, or that's just within their private realm if they were to, for example, compensate each other financially?
I'm not aware of that kind of discussion taking place.
Okay. Now, coming back to this operational guideline, is it correct to say that the goal of the operational guideline is to assist commercial fishermen in being able to catch the total commercial allocation?
Yes, that would be part of it, and then the other piece is trying to respect the coast-wide shares for each of the commercial fleet or commercial gears, seine, gillnet, and troll.
Okay. And in your view, having this kind of an operational guideline, which allows for flexibility by allowing transfers of uncaught allocation in season, is this a good operational guideline in comparison to one that doesn't allow for any flexibility, where, for example, the pre-season percentages are set and then there's just no movement?
In this particular case, it provides a mechanism to move area gear shares which otherwise wouldn't exist.
And do you have a view as to whether this is positive, like something better than not allowing for any movement?
Yes.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Mr. Commissioner, Nicole Chavez, I'm counsel for Stoller Tribal Council, and Dichi Amin Yemen, co-counsel. Mr. Grout, I have a few questions for you, and I'll start off with a few points of clarification and then questions regarding implementation of policy and allocation. So just to start off and to make sure we're on the same page when it comes to terms and words that we use, when we talk about commercial fishery, we talk about the area harvesters that engage in large-scale commercial industrial fishery, correct?
When I'm talking about the commercial area gear types, I'm referring to the gear types A through H, describing the different seine, gillnet, and troll fleets.
And that sometimes also get referred to as area harvesters, right?
Potentially.
I think they refer to themselves like that, and we've heard it. Now, when you compare that to Aboriginal fisheries, say in the Fraser River specifically, and specifically above Mission, the area harvesters in comparison have a much larger capacity to catch large amounts of salmon in a short period of time.
Sorry, it sounded like you were making a statement.
No, I'm asking you. I'm asking you if you would agree. When you compare the Aboriginal fishery in the Fraser River, especially above Mission, area harvesters in comparison have a much larger capacity to catch large amounts of salmon in a short period of time.
I don't think I would agree with that statement generally. If you were to look at a troll fishery, for example, the harvest rates I'd say are perhaps less than on a catch per unit effort basis than some of the harvests we've seen in the area from Mission to Sawmill in the Fraser. So it would really depend on the commercial fleets you're comparing.
Sure, so let's compare it Area E gillnet fishery.
I don't have, it would be good to have specific numbers for a given year, but I'd say both of those areas have the capacity to harvest large amounts of fish.
But what I'm talking to you about is large amounts of fish in a shorter period of time when looking at fleet size and the size of the boats specifically. You'd agree that they actually have a larger capacity to catch large amounts of fish in a shorter period of time.
Well, you're asking me to make a comparison between the number of commercial gillnet boats that might go out on an opening in the lower part of the Fraser River to the number of set nets that might go out, for example, on a fishery in the Mission to Sawmill area, and the number of drift nets that might also be operated by First Nations in that area. So I don't have a specific quantitative comparison I can give you on that, but they both have the capacity to remove large amounts of fish per unit of time when both fisheries are open.
Now, here's my question. For example, we were talking about specifically about the use of revival boxes. Now, if even in an Aboriginal fishery, if you have a larger vessel above 35 feet, there's a requirement of a revival box, right?
I believe it's at 30 feet, but I could be mistaken about that. I believe my earlier comments were that it was at 30 feet.
Okay,
requirement for a revival box.
Now, when it comes to like an Aboriginal fishery operated by individuals of families, they often have much smaller boats, like small aluminium shell boats. Now, in that context, a revival box would be a safety issue.
That's correct. Most of the vessels are smaller than 30 feet in the First Nation fishery, especially in that area.
And you'd have a concern about safety issues in that regard?
Yes, I understand the concerns relate to vessel stability, having the revival box containing water. There may be also, well, that's the main one.
And stability. Now, when it comes to intersectoral allocations, DFO, I understand, distinguishes 3 sectors: Aboriginal, commercial, and recreational, right?
That's correct.
Now, I think it's fair to characterize 2 of them as stakeholders, commercial and recreational, and 1 of them as rights holders, namely the Aboriginal sector.
Yes, food, social, and ceremonial rights.
So those are constitutionally protected rights to fish, right?
That's correct.
Now, and actually, Aboriginal title and rights are actually the only constitutionally protected property rights in Canada. You'd agree with me on that as well?
Mr. Commissioner, I think she's my friend is going into legal questions, and I object to that.
I'm ready to move on. Now, when it comes to but speaking about that difference between rights holders and stakeholders, you would agree that when it comes to they play a different role in decision-making processes.
Yes, that's correct. The department has bilateral consultations with First Nations about their fishing plans.
And when you're dealing with a rights holder, that also comes along with decision-making power in those processes. Or rights holders have decision-making powers when it comes to management decisions, right?
In terms of fisheries, the minister is the ultimate authority as far as decision-making goes.
That's the DFO position.
Mr. Commissioner, again, I think my friend is verging into legal discussions here that are inappropriate for this witness.
I'm fine. To move on now, I have a question to clarify when it comes to in-season management. The Fraser River panel determines if there will be a commercial opening, correct?
For fisheries in panel waters, that's correct. For Canadian fisheries that are not in panel waters, the decision's made by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, but we'll typically review those at the Fraser River panel.
But even in panel waters, it's actually DFO that determines the conditions for the opening, right? Like duration of the opening, gear type, location.
That's correct.
Now, when it comes to openings for Aboriginal fishery, especially for food, social, and ceremonial purposes, those are the responsibility of the DFO.
That's correct.
And it's the responsibility of the DFO to ensure priority resource allocation for those purposes, right?
That is consistent with our allocation priorities, yes.
So you could have an opening for Aboriginal peoples for FSC purposes, even if there's a closure on the Fraser River panel.
If your question is whether we can have food, social, and ceremonial fisheries when commercial fisheries or recreational fisheries are closed, the answer is yes.
Now, it's the practice of the DFO for Aboriginal economic fishery to only open it when there's a commercial opening, right?
That's not entirely true. We're trying to manage those fisheries using similar rules and priority. It does not necessarily mean they're going to fish at the exact same time. In the case of Fraser Sockeye, we'd be looking to fish for the same stocks and species that the commercial total allowable catch had been identified for.
So under the allocation, under the TAC, under the commercial TAC.
If I haven't been clear, when there's a commercial total allowable catch identified, we would have fisheries for commercial as well as economic opportunities on the same populations that the total allowable catch have been identified for. Those fisheries may not occur at exactly the same time.
Correct, but only when there is a Fraser River panel opening. When the Fraser River panel has deemed the fisheries open for commercial purposes.
Again, the decision on the economic opportunity openings do not require my recollection's a bit fuzzy here. There'd be a better question for Mr. Rosenberger, the Fraser panel chair, but typically at the panel we'd be informing the Fraser panel of our fishing plans, including for economic opportunities. I'm just trying to recall now whether there's an approval for those fisheries in the lower part of the Fraser River in panel waters. Can't recall off the top of my head.
Now, when it comes to the lower Fraser, DFO does no longer sign fisheries agreements with individual First Nations. You insist on comprehensive fisheries agreements with larger bands, right? Larger groups, sorry.
Generally, that's been the approach. We have had agreements, for example, with Musqueam, which is an individual First Nation.
A larger
well.
First Nation. Now, when it comes to those comprehensive fisheries agreements that you signed with larger groups, they are signed on an annual basis?
Yes, that's my understanding. These are negotiated annually with our staff in the areas. Usually the area director leads those discussions.
So they're not long-term agreements, right?
I believe that, well, the recent ones have just been for 1 year. I can't speak to what's been done in the past.
Now, the incentive to sign those comprehensive fisheries agreements is economic opportunities under them, right?
I'm sorry, I missed the start of your question.
Sorry, the incentive to sign economic opportunity, comprehensive fisheries agreements is the economic opportunities under them, right?
That would be one part of the agreements. I believe there are other components around catch monitoring, food, social, and ceremonial fishery allocations as well.
Now, some bands in an area will sign and you'll refer to them as signatory bands,
That's correct.
and others will not sign and you refer to them as non-signatory bands, right?
That's correct.
But the DFO still considers the overall FSC allocation for the area to be under that agreement.
I can't speak to that specific question.
Okay, so
And Mr. Commissioner, I just simply raise as a question whether some of these are topics that may arise more properly under later sections of our hearings plan.
And Mr. Commissioner, I'm just trying to set that out now because we've been told that Mr. Grout is not going to be back to be examined on allocation issues. So I wanted to just clarify those because I needed to clarify that in order to ask my allocation questions. But I'm ready to move to the specific questions. Now, Mr. Grout, your position now is one of regional resource managers for salmon, right?
That's correct.
So I think it's fair to say that you work on different processes dealing with the different sectors, commercial, recreational, and Aboriginal.
That's correct.
And you apply departmental policies on the ground in regard to salmon harvest management and allocation.
Personally, I'm not usually doing that. It's usually carried out through our area offices and our area staff.
Okay, but actually when looking at your CV, it specifically sets out that it is your role to ensure that those departmental policies, I guess, are applied consistently across the sectors, right?
That's correct.
Now, and I think that's where it's been getting confusing, a little bit confusing for all of us because we're dealing with so many policies at once. And if I can just recap with you a little bit, when it comes to the commercial fishery, you now have area-based management, right? Since the Mifflin Plan. You also have, since 1999, the discussion paper, which you now refer to as your allocation policy, right? And then you have the 2005 vision paper, which now is the policy that you would say you're applying for share-based management, right?
Yes, the area-based licensing was put in place in 1996. You refer to the allocation policy as a discussion paper. There was a discussion paper on the allocation policy, but then it's been formalized as the allocation policy.
Yeah, same paper.
Well, there was initial discussion paper on that, and then the allocation policy was finalized from that discussion paper.
And that would be our Exhibit 264, if we could just briefly bring it up to ensure that we are all on the same page.
And just on that note, I'd like to confirm, I think the premise of the question may have not quite captured that, as I understood it, the evidence related to a discussion paper which separately led to what we're referring to as the allocation policy, but they're distinct documents. I believe they're both in evidence.
Correct. So you have, as the result of that discussion paper now, the allocation policy, which is called a new direction, right? Now, but you have to read that together with other policies like the 1998 selective fishing policy, which you refer to as an input-oriented policy, right?
I'm not sure if I stated it as such.
Well, you made that distinction between input-oriented and output-oriented policies, right?
No, I wasn't
approaches.
referring to policies there. I was referring to types of approaches you might use in implementing the principles in the policy.
Correct, okay. So if I were to ask you to show me one comprehensive and consistent policy and show me a policy manual that you apply when it comes to harvest management and allocation, there is not one comprehensive document.
The allocation policy itself is the primary driver on our harvest management decisions.
And yet, we've spent a lot of time also speaking about the vision document and the vision paper for share-based management, which is also driving the approach you're applying in fisheries management, right?
It's laying out a vision for how we might change in the future, that's right.
Now, which policies play into that for Aboriginal peoples? For harvest management and allocation, which additional policies are there for Aboriginal peoples?
There may be a number. You're probably best to ask that question to our Director of Treaty and Aboriginal Policy. I can't speak well to all of them.
But yet you are the one who is responsible for actually applying those policies consistently across sectors when it comes to harvest management and allocation, correct?
Yeah, my primary responsibility is for laying out and consulting on the integrated fisheries management plans and the consultation processes that are associated with those. There's considerable input and work done by our area staff and meeting bilaterally with First Nations.
Now,
And developing the agreements that we have with First Nations.
so when it comes to the integrated fisheries management plan, a lot of that is based on pre-season forecasts, right? The information that you have in there.
No, for Fraser Sockeye, the integrated fishery management plan includes information on the preseason forecast, but it also includes the decision rules we're going to use that cover a range of abundance for Fraser River Sockeye. So we recognize that the preseason forecast distribution may not capture the full range of potential returns in all cases. The decision rules themselves do cover that full range of abundances and the potential outcomes that may occur.
Now, the consultations regarding the integrated fisheries management plan occur pre-season, right? So the majority of those consultations are actually in pre-season when all we're operating from is that pre-season forecasting.
We do have, in terms of our pre-season planning, a series of consultations that lead up to the production or development and production of the integrated fisheries management plan. There's a number of processes that we use in season around implementing that plan, including with First Nations. For example, in the Fraser River, we've got a weekly call that's set up to explain information from the Fraser River panel. We've got fishery planning committees that are part of the comprehensive agreements.
The information line is what you were referring to just now.
Pardon me?
The information line, right, is what you were just referring to? The call regarding to share information, right?
That's correct. That's
Now,
just an example of some of the processes we use in season.
Now, when it comes to intersectoral allocations, right, I'd like to discuss that with you also in light of priority resource allocation. And I think it's fair to think of priority resource allocation kind of like a pyramid, not so dissimilar from Maslow's pyramids of needs, where you have basic physiological needs at the bottom and then you move up in the scale of needs. Now, at the bottom of that priority resource allocation is conservation, correct?
Sorry, I was thinking back to my first year psychology class. I do remember hearing about the so I must admit I lost your question there at
Sorry,
the end.
but I think it's helpful to think about it not just to think about it like a pyramid and apart from Maslow, but our pyramid, our priority resource allocation pyramid, has at the bottom of it conservation, correct?
I'm going to interject in the psychology discussion to simply say we're pressing against our time. Mr. Timberg does have examination, perhaps departing from Maslow and moving back to questions in the time would be appreciated.
I'm right
Thank
there. So at the bottom of priority resource allocation is conservation, right?
Well, I would characterize, I mean, if we're going to use a pyramid as an analogy, I think conservation is the top priority. So I would be at the top.
Sure. Okay. First priority, conservation. That clearly has an Aboriginal dimension. Traditional knowledge being key to in situ conservation. You'd agree with that?
I would agree that that is a component of the considerations in setting out the escapement objectives for Fraser Sockeye.
And now when it comes to the sectors and priority resource allocation, you have Aboriginal and then after it commercial and recreational, right?
That's correct.
Now, the majority of the commercial area harvest happens in marine areas or at the mouth of the Fraser River, correct?
For Fraser Sockeye, yes.
Sure. And before those runs are ever subject or open to an Aboriginal harvest in the Fraser River, especially above Mission then, right? So this commercial area harvest will occur before the same runs are ever subject and open to an Aboriginal harvest in the Fraser River, especially above Mission.
Not necessarily. We have a window closure that's in place for early Stewart sockeye. There are some limited FSC fisheries that can occur then. We typically have had some communal, food, social, and ceremonial openings in the marine waters as well as in the Fraser River in a number of years prior to any commercial harvest.
Now, if there is an area commercial harvest, right, that will impact the amount of fish that's available for an Aboriginal harvest upriver.
Potentially, in that the fish that otherwise would have been there are being removed. In terms of making decisions, we're trying to ensure that the amount of fish removed is not inconsistent with our objectives for providing for salmon to reach the spawning grounds and for food, social, and ceremonial harvest.
Now, if there is, though, an overharvest by area harvesters in the commercial fisheries, or conservation concerns escalate after their harvest, it impacts Aboriginal peoples in river and their ability to exercise their right to fish.
It can potentially do that.
Now, you calculate a management adjustment into fisheries allocations to try and secure certain returns to the spawning grounds, right?
Yes, management adjustments are used to account for the difference between mission and upstream spawning areas, and taking into account correlations with environmental variables to try and improve the achievement of those escapement objectives.
But you do not calculate in a similar adjustment or buffer to ensure sufficient fish in the Fraser River that there is sufficient fish available for Aboriginal peoples to fish in the Fraser River. You don't have a similar adjustment or buffer calculated in.
No, not explicitly.
It could be done, right?
Potentially.
Now, there's also the case, and I'm sure you've heard complaints raised about the issue of openings for signatory bans of comprehensive fisheries agreements, but not for non-signatory bans, so that they can meet the FSC needs.
Sorry, what is?
I'm asking you if you've heard about the issue and the concern raised about openings for signatory bans to comprehensive fisheries agreements, so fisheries openings for signatory bans under comprehensive fisheries agreements, but not for non-signatory bans, so that they can fulfill their FSC needs.
I'm not aware of a. It would help if I had a specific example to go with your question. I'm not sure I'm following it.
I'll give you a specific example. For example, if you're looking in the Fraser River, you have non-signatory and signatory bans, right? There can be cases where an opening is done for signatory bans who can also fish for economic opportunity, and at the same time there's no opening for non-signatory bans. You'd agree with that?
If the non-signatory bans are not or there would not be an opening for economic purposes for the non-signatory bans in that case.
But there's also cases where it's just simply no opening for the non-signatory bans, but there is an opening for signatory bans.
I'm not aware of specific examples of that.
Okay, I have one last point or issue that I want to raise. When it comes to the vision document in 2005 that was in response to partly the Pearce-McRae report, right?
You're referring to the Pacific Fisheries Reform discussion paper?
Correct. Now, this ITQ approach was that was recommended by Pearce-McRae was initially recommended for a post-treaty era, right?
I believe in that report they were recommending immediate implementation. In the Pearce-McRae report. The
Pearce-McRae report actually focuses on a vision for fisheries in a post-treaty era.
That's right, but I think your question was whether they recommended implementing, when they recommended implementing ITQs, and my recollection was they recommended implementing it as soon as possible.
Those are all my questions.
I have 3 questions for redirect. Mr. Grout, it's Mr. Tim Burke for Canada. Don Rosenblum last week on cross-examination asked you if you had any examples of consensus reached at the IHPC meetings, and you spoke about 1, waiver of license fees, 2, the payment of CSAB members to attend and provide a secretariat, and you also mentioned consensus was reached on early Stewart sockeye salmon, but you were not given the opportunity to explain that 3rd example, and so I'd like to ask you now to explain that 3rd example.
Well, the context is a bit foggy at this point, but the two examples were given of the IHPC raising consensus, and I just cited a third example related to early Stuart sockeye and support for a motion that had been put forward by one of the First Nation representatives, Marcel Shepard, related to the early Stuart sockeye. And there were some details, specific details around that motion of consensus that we captured in our minutes. So I just put it out as another example.
Right. And so, just so I understand, so there was agreement on the early Stuart sockeye, and plans to manage that fishery.
Yeah, at this point, the details are slipping my mind here. I can't remember the exact points that they raised there.
All right, thank you. Mr. Harvey last week presented a number of documents to you with respect to analysis of for loss of employment and other socioeconomic analysis. So my question to you is, who at DFO or what department at DFO would normally deal with any economic analysis information?
We have a policy group that handles the economic analysis work that's done internally. They do quite often use external consultants to assist with that as well. It's not my primary area of expertise or responsibility, though.
And who leads that policy group?
Currently, it's Jennifer Neener.
Okay, and she's located in Vancouver?
In Vancouver, at the regional headquarters building.
And is there a national part of that?
There is, but I can't give you the lead at this point.
Okay, thank you. My final question is, just now Brenda Gardner suggested that a recommendation should be made that further steps with respect to implementing share-based management not take place until DFO has completed negotiations with First Nations on both FSC and commercial access to the fisheries. So my question for you is, approximately how many First Nations are there in BC who are reliant on Fraser River sockeye salmon? If you could just give us a general overview of that, both perhaps coastal First Nations and then interior First Nations.
Well, it's a large number, well over 100. I couldn't give you the specific number. They would be in the approach areas to the Fraser River. Fraser sockeye have also been in the south, so on the west coast of Vancouver Island and the approaches in through Johnson Straits. There have been years where Fraser sockeye have also been harvested by First Nations in the north as well, in the Haida Gwaii and in other parts in the north, and then within the Fraser River itself, all the way up through the Fraser River into the Prince George area.
All right, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Mr. Commissioner, that concludes Mr. Grout's evidence. I have just one moment of comments with respect to our schedule moving forward.
Before you do that, Mr. Grout, you've been here before, and I don't know if you're coming back on another panel, but I just wanted to express the appreciation of the Commission for your willingness to return these oftentimes to the Commission witness box and for your cooperation in answering the questions of Council. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Commissioner, we will return tomorrow at 10 a.m. with the second Commercial Fishers Perspectives panel. Two updates on the schedule, which I'll communicate now. One, that we have made a shift only today to combine two parts of our recreational evidence. So Wednesday's witnesses, Ms. Snedden and Ms. Adams, will be combined on a panel with Thursday's witness, Mr. Tatey. We thought that was a more productive and efficient way to go about leading that evidence. So that will be one panel for 2 days with all three witnesses, Wednesday and Thursday this week. The second update is to advise that the witness that initially had been scheduled for today, Lisa Miaska, on commercial licensing, has now been scheduled for March the 15th. Her evidence will be led that day. Thank you.
Very much. We'll now adjourn. Thank you.
Hearing is now adjourned for the day, and we'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.